Hello and welcome to July's All the Everything. Welcome. And this is a fabulous topic that was chosen by our wonderful Facebook group members. And it is how to recognize the tests of expansion and not go into contraction. And just come out of the pre-show party. As ever, it's always hard to get me out of a party, that party being very different. And having a really wonderful conversation about what's meant by expansion, what's meant by test, what's meant by contraction, how these things show up for people. So I was already thinking this is a particularly rich topic. And it's no wonder so many people voted for this topic. It was the clear winner. And having had a chance to talk to people and see what's showing up for them, I can really see why. And it made me realize, like, oh, it's odd really that we've not done a show specifically on this before, because it's such a big thing. It will show up for anyone, I believe, who is living what you could say a big life, a soul-led life, a life where they're taking aligned action. What we're talking about here, that expansion, that call to expansion, the test that will come, and that compulsion to go into contraction will be showing up for, I think, all of us on this path. It's certainly what I've experienced myself and witnessed in others. So this is going to be a very deep one and is going to go to all the places. It's going to definitely be one of those ones that lives up to the title of the shows, All the Everything. So I say as ever, I don't always do this, but I've decided I will do it this month. I'm going to start by sharing what I've been up to over the past month, what I've been creating and consuming. The consuming part is actually relevant to, I think it was the last podcast episode with my teacher, Jez Hughes. And it felt apt to, even though we went deep into his book on that show, that's been something. His book is what I've been consuming the last month, but it's also been just very alive for me in my awareness and the conversations I've been having. So I just wanted to mention it again. So Jez Hughes, as I say, is my shamanic teacher. He wrote a book, The Heart of Life, I'm not quite sure how many years ago, maybe 5 years ago. And then his recent book was published last year, so it's not even a year old, and is very focused on what we could say is the causes of mental illness, the disconnection, the imbalance we have in our modern world, shamanic sickness, and what we can do about those things. And it really is such a wonderful book, so much so, and I shared this on that episode, that it's taking me a long time to read it, because I read a bit of it and then it kind of sends me off down a rabbit hole of thinking or writing or researching. But it is absolutely excellent if you have any interest in mental health, in our connection to the natural world, in shamanism. I would recommend it so highly. It's also a book. I think I've now given away about 4 copies, so this is my 5th copy that I'm now reading. But I would really, really recommend you trying it out. And if you haven't already, go listen to that show. And what I've been creating over the last month, as ever, I've been up to all sorts of things. Creation is a huge part of my life. And the thing I thought I wanted to share this month was my garden. And the reason for that is because it's something, anyone that's got a garden, that loves gardening, is so kind of interwoven into our lives. It's not really something I really see as being an act of creation. It just feels so normal for me, so sort of like just in my life. And then I was with my tree, I think earlier this week, and had this realization that even though I have such a deep connection with the land, and particularly the land around me, like we're in a cottage in quite a rural area, surrounded by fields and woodlands, and I have an incredibly deep connection with the land around me. And although I spend countless hours in my garden, working in my garden, sitting in my garden, doing rituals in my garden, I realized somehow I'd created this kind of disconnect between what I see as the wild, the land outside of my garden, and my garden. And of course, the immediate land around, it's so obvious now I say it, but the immediate land around me is my garden. It certainly includes my garden. And so I've been in the work over the last week or so of much more consciously reconnecting to my garden in the way that I would connect with, for example, my tree and the land around it. And that's going to take a number of forms, some of which I'm still discovering, but really allowing myself to like be in the garden in the same way that I might be at my sit spot, just allowing myself to be there, connecting to the earth, connecting to the plants, connecting to the insects, the animals, the air, the sun, the wind. And it's the simplest practice, really. It really is the simplest practice, but one of the most powerful ones I know. And so this, again, is a very conscious act of creation to create my garden as sacred land. And there's a number of other things I will be doing. Last year, I set up a kind of big medicine wheel in the 4 directions in my garden, but it's not really been something that I've spent huge amounts of time actively working with. So that will certainly be something I'll be doing more of. There's a ceremony I'm in the creation of, which I now plan to do in my garden. So this, again, has been quite a surprising act of creation, because, again, my garden is already so precious to me. It's something I spend so much time in and thinking about, and yet somehow had created this kind of compartmentalization. So my invitation to you is, if you're noticing you're feeling some resonance with what I'm sharing here, if you do have, and it might not be a whole garden, it might just be a patch of land that's near you, whether you can cultivate this kind of relationship to it, a sacred relationship to it. Which of course includes things we spoke about on the show before, making offerings. And if we are, for example, feeding the plants, that's a form of offering, but there's many other ways that we can make offerings of incense and song and money. There's all sorts of other ways we can make offerings to the land, and the land really needs it. The land is bereft of humans offering right now. Okay, I am now going to dive into our main topic of how to recognize the tests of expansion and not go into contraction. I'm going to ask you a few questions that I just asked in the pre-show party, because I think it's really helpful if we can really connect into what a topic means for us first. It allows us to be much more in the aliveness of the topic rather than it be a theoretical thing. We're really experiencing it for ourselves and how this shows up for us. So very, very easy, quick questions. And you might want to write these down. You might want to come back to them outside of the show, or you might want to just kind of see what arises for you. So the first question is, what does expansion mean to you? What does expansion mean to you? And I'm going to share some of the ways expansion was defined by our Facebook group members. Some really gorgeous definitions here. Expansion for me is knowing I'm the whole sky instead of just being the weather. Expansion means being able to create more on the outside by feeling more freedom on the inside. Expansion for me is fullness, potential, possibility, all leading to liberation. Expansion is when your nervous system is able to be with things, stroke experiences that it couldn't be with before. Again, really gorgeous definitions there. And I'm going to be sharing in a moment what I mean by expansion. And it really, I would say, includes all of those in a way that I think contextualizes how they can all be part of this same word. Next question is, what tests do you experience? How do those tests show up? So when you're in expansion, what are those tests that you experience? And again, I'll share some of the ways these tests show up for our Facebook group members. One of them just said, my life, with a bunch of exclamation marks. Another said, things, business, stroke money, stroke clients, on the outside falling apart while you're expanding, or continually getting clients that are no's, kind of baiting to see if you'll say yes, which would be misaligned, which is a great example. And tests on the outside, tests the outside not looking like who I know I am. Okay. Last one. What makes you contract, and then what does contraction look like for you? What makes you contract, and what does contraction for you look like? And I'll just give you a moment to think about that, and then I'll share some of what our Facebook group members said. Okay. Not being seen, I then withdraw and I'm cold towards the person who triggered me. And this theme of withdrawing showed up a lot for members. This is definitely one of the ways that we can respond. Another one said, I withdraw from life. And then another one, more aligned isn't coming. So this is how it happens. What has this person contract? More aligned isn't coming, fear of losing money. Contraction looks like locking myself into my office to force results instead of trusting whatever shows up. And I was explaining that we tend to be one way or another. It's another example of the shadow pole, where we either withdraw and opt out altogether, or we do all the things, we double down and try to make the thing happen in ways that aren't aligned. And of course, both are compelled by fear. And then another member said, no, sorry, I think it was the same member said that. She said, I do both. She does the withdrawing and the doubling down. So let's have a look first. I always like to do this. I love to know the neutral definition of a word often before I then start to explore it. And the dictionary definition of the word expansion includes the action of becoming larger or more extensive. The action of becoming larger or more extensive, which then leads me to then ask, in that case, what is becoming expanded? What is becoming larger or more extensive? And the reason I ask that is I love exploring these kind of like intangible, mystical, metaphysical ideas. I love those energetic laws that run through life. And I love being able to understand them as much as I can at a kind of simple, practical level. And sometimes these things, we can't really understand them directly. The best thing we can do is understand it from a point of view of a metaphor. So what I'm about to say is the best way I can articulate how I'm experiencing what is expanded, but just recognize most of what I say from here on in isn't necessarily literally as I'm saying it. There's certainly a kind of metaphor that's woven throughout this that we need to almost like have an agreement on in order for any of this to make sense. So what is being expanded? I would say what's being expanded is the human. We're expanding the human to accommodate more of the soul. And so by human, I mean this being that we came into in this particular lifetime. So that includes our body, includes our particular neural makeup, it includes the family we came into, includes everything that we could call, and again, we're using concepts to define things that aren't necessarily exactly as exactly as we're talking about them. There's definitely some agreement we're going to have on terms here. But as far as I'm seeing it, the human needs to be expanded so that we can contain more of our soul, that infinite and yet unique aspect of us. And firstly, why do we do that? Why are we even in that work of expanding the human to accommodate more of the soul? It seems to me that we come here with maybe not necessarily initially a conscious sense, but certainly a subconscious sense that we came here for a reason, to experience certain things, to maybe learn certain things, to grow in certain ways. And certainly as we do the work to understand the nature of ourselves, we begin to get clearer and clearer on what that is. That North Star of the fullness of our soul begins to call us louder and louder and louder. So that is what has us expand in order to allow ourselves to be the fullness of our soul. We feel that call into expansion. We know our human needs to expand in order to be all that we came here to be. So some people would be listening to this. I mean, they probably wouldn't be listening to this in the first place, but some people, if they were randomly listening to this, would be like, well, none of this makes any sense. I don't even resonate with the idea of a soul. I don't feel any call to it. And that's likely because they have not yet stepped onto this path. And it might be for that particular lifetime they're in, that's not going to happen. My sense is if you are listening or watching this show now, you're not one of those people. You're one of those people that absolutely is feeling the call of your soul to expand. So you'll know when I'm saying that, what that looks like for you, how you feel that, how you hear that. And that only gets more and more clear. The deeper we go on our soul path, it gets to the point where there isn't even a question. There isn't even a kind of, oh, could this be what my soul's calling to me to? The only question is like, oh, am I going to say yes, even though it's going to cost me? And so that is just something that it gets simpler, not necessarily easier. So how do we expand? And it's really what I've just said, is recognizing what we're being called into and choosing to heed that call. Differently said, it's we choose to take actions in alignment with our vision. So again, the more we've been on this path, the clearer we are on the vision of our soul being fully expressed. So it's a vision that we can experience energetically here and now, but it's really something that we're seeing into the future, as if time is linear, as what our lives would be like, who we would be like, what our relationships would be like if we were fully expressed. So once we have any degree of clarity on that vision, we start to be presented with aligned actions we can take towards it in order to create it. So that's how we start to expand. And this will happen in phases. So we will typically be in a phase of expansion, complete on that, then be invited into another one. I'm saying invited as if it's as if it's nice and polite and a kind of nice embossed card that comes through the mail. Often it isn't. Often it's very unwelcome. But we receive those invitations into that next level of expansion. And I'm going to give some examples of the ways these invitations can show up. And I'm sure some of these will be ones that you've experienced or are starting to notice you're being called into. So beginning a relationship, a new relationship, that can be a huge one for many of us. And that could be an intimate relationship. It might be a relationship of another kind, but a relationship that's not necessarily, it might seem at the beginning that it's within our comfort zone, but at some point starts to be clear that it's not. So it could be starting a new relationship. It could be, as the example of our Facebook group member, raising your prices if you're in business of some kind. I suspect many of you listening are change workers or coaches, so it could be that you're raising your prices. It could be a choice to be more expressed. At the moment in Wake Up Medicine, this month we're really focusing on the theme of expression. And so it could be a choice, this sense of, I am here now to be more expressed. And that could show up in so many ways. It could be being more expressed on social media. It could be more expressed in your work. It could be more expressed in relationships. Or it could be choosing to take a path that's off the beaten track in some way. For example, when I chose to devote to shamanism, it probably wasn't as off the beaten track for me, given the work I already do, but it still was, it still was a big decision. It didn't come easily to me. It could be for some of you actually choosing to work with us in Wake of the Wild. That for you is that step off the beaten track onto this path. So this, again, this call to expansion can come in a number of ways. There are countless examples I could give, but I'm sure you've got one. If you're not already in that phase of expansion, I'm sure you've just completed on one, or you're being called to another one. So just notice what that is. And then the tests happen, then the tests occur. And so I'm going to talk to those examples I've given to give an indication of the kinds of ways these tests would show up. So it could be that if we've began a new relationship, the person we're in a relationship with then starts to behave in a way where we're thinking, I don't know if they're that into me. Maybe I want to be with them more than they want to be with me. Or I don't know if I can be with this part of them, the way they're behaving. So that's an example of a test that might show up in a relationship. With regards to that example of raising our prices, it could be that you start to speak to potential clients and they're saying to you, you're too expensive. It could be that, they are not happy to pay whatever that new price is. Or it could be that you get people who are, and this goes back to what the group member said, you have people that are saying yes, but they're not the right people. They're happy to pay the price, but they're not actually the right people. And so that's the way that this kind of sometimes it can be a bit tricksy. It's really worth noticing whether something truly feels aligned when it appears to not be a test. Sometimes it can be. And so the example of feeling that call to be expressed, we had an example shared in the medicine circle earlier where someone had started to become more expressed and then was really harshly criticized by someone close to them about what they shared on the post. And that could be, you may well have experienced this already, where you're starting to share more of yourself and then that's just not welcome. People around you, random people on social media, are disagreeing with you, criticizing you, wanting to debate you, but in a very kind of disconnecting, harsh way. And then lastly, the example I gave of stepping off that beaten track onto a new path. My goodness, well, I could give you countless examples of that because this is what shows up for our clients and students pretty much every day of the week. Being triggered, feeling like you're out of your depth, even wondering, like, is this dangerous? You know, is this actually safe? It feels so extreme, whatever work we're in. Is this even sensible? And so these are the different ways. And again, whatever the expansion is, the tests are going to come with whatever that particular expansion is, but they're ways that I think show up for many of us. And so this is when the contraction can happen. And as I said earlier, this is completely understandable when we can consider that most of us have parts of us that are going to be saying, stop, this is scary, we need to not continue with this, it's not safe. And so at this point, we might decide, you know, oh, it's just not meant to be. And I hear this quite often, like, how do I know that this thing that's showing up is actually, it's a sign to say to me, no, this isn't aligned in the first place. That's a really typical way that contraction can happen, that we decide, oh, this is a sign, it's not meant to be, I'm just gonna not do the thing. Or we decide, okay, I can't cope, it's too much for me. And then again, sometimes the contraction comes in a way where it doesn't appear that we've chosen out, because we're then sort of flurrying around trying to find another way. Ultimately, we typically, though, in a true contraction, we then press eject and we opt out of whatever that invitation was to expand. And then we think we can go back to where we were before the test happened. Of course, life doesn't work like that. There isn't a way that we can go back. We haven't yet, as far as I know, invented time travel. So we can't actually go back. And our soul will still be calling us forward. So ultimately, we'll feel this sense of, I can't actually just stay here in contraction. We will find ourselves experiencing that call and that kind of test and that choice, whether we're going to go into contraction over and over again until we do choose fully into whatever that expansion is. And so this is why this topic is so important. Until we are able to choose past the contraction, we will just stay at that same place. Whatever that expansion we're being called into will be there kind of just before that full expansion until we're ready to choose into it. Something important to recognize, and one of the Facebook members quotes I read out touched on this. The tests always look external. They always look like something out there that's coming towards us. But what they are is a manifestation of internal closure, an internal closure. And the word closure is very intentional. It's really a place that we are currently, and again, going back to this, the way I described, what we need to do is expand the human to accommodate the fullness of our soul. These are places that we're too small at the moment to accommodate the fullness of our soul in order to be at this expanded level. Does that make sense? So any place that we're feeling this sense of, oh, this test is too much, it's because of an internal closure, internal constriction. So what creates this? Why do we feel too small to accommodate the fullness of our soul? It's not even full. We actually are too small at that point. There isn't just, it's not even, most of the time, it's not a belief. We literally are too small at that point. And there's two main reasons for this. The first one is simply that we haven't yet grown into that experience, which is fine. We haven't come here to be the size that we'll be at the end of our lives. We need to have all those experiences. So that's part of it. It's just that we've not had that experience. It's you could call it immaturity, really, but not immaturity in an offensive way, in a shaming way, but just we haven't matured into that kind of experience. So again, completely as it's meant to be. The other reason that we have this constriction in a part of our body, I'm saying part of our body, part of our human, is wounding. And I think I spoke quite a bit about this in the last All the Everything about the shadow pole. A way that we can see shadow is parts of our soul have actually been put outside of our conscious awareness or conscious ability to embody and express. And so whilst that part of our soul isn't here and embodied, that's a place that we're closed. It's a place that we cannot allow our soul, the fullness of our soul, to shine into the world. And so, and notice both of these things are likely to be showing up at the same time. The very reason it's an expansion is because it's something we haven't experienced yet. And it's almost certainly going to require you to call back, to heal back into the system, that part of your soul that was lost. I say lost, and I went into much more detail about this in the last show. We could say it as pushed into our subconscious, we could say lost, but ultimately isn't here in our conscious awareness, and we're not able to use it. And so again, both of these are likely to show up most of the time at the same, like at once. So in the relationship example, we're called into expansion by choosing into a new relationship. We'll then start to experience the other person as potentially like pulling away. And so the first way this is showing up, there is this immaturity that we haven't experienced this particular form of relationship with this particular form of person before. So there is an expansion needed just because this is a new form of relationship. And it might be that it requires, for example, more intimacy, more ability to be intimate than previous relationships we've been in. The way the wounding is showing up is many of us carry what we could call abandonment wounds. So experiences we've had often in childhood that have us feel that we're at risk, our very security is at risk of people leaving us. And so in this example, when we're feeling someone pull away, that abandonment wound will be triggered, and it will have us have this sensation of, okay, well, this person now looks like they're leaving me. And so again, in these instances, we typically think the test is coming from out there. What's actually happening is internally, we're feeling the places that we're closed. We're feeling that place where we are coming right up against our wounding, right up against the part of us that has been thrust out of our conscious awareness, and we're experiencing ourselves as what we could say is unlovable. We're not able to be open to love in that place. I wonder if to give another example of that. So with the example I gave of the expansion being choosing into a path that's off the beaten path, as I explained, the expansion is to move into, I guess, a new way of being, a new learning and a new understanding. Like, for example, on the path of Waking the Wild, really starting to walk that path of your soul. The tests are going to come in these forms of, a good example will be like, I'm not ready for this. I'm not ready for this. You know, it's too scary. It's triggering me too much. And so the test looks like it's whatever the teaching is, whatever the path is. What's actually happening again internally is we haven't yet walked there. It's just an immaturity. It's just an experience we've not had. And internally it's triggering wounds. An example of that actually was in one of the first few circles of this Waking the Wild medicine. I took the circle on a drum journey, and I hadn't shared with them what was going to take place in much detail. And so some of them hadn't experienced a shamanic drum journey before. They were thinking something different would happen to what happened. They then felt this sense of, I'm stupid, I should have known that was going to happen, and then maybe persecuting me. Well, she should have told us it was what was going to happen, so I could have been prepared for it. And these are examples of ways that old wounds of perhaps feeling stupid, feeling unsafe, feeling like the person that's holding whatever the situation is isn't actually there, responsible and holding you. So these are old wounds that are being triggered. And again, I haven't got time, but I could give an example for each one of those ways that we're being called into expansion. But hopefully that makes sense. There's going to be both. So we're going to be called into experiences we're not experienced, and our wounds are going to be triggered most of the time. Not all times that we're called into expansion, our wounds are going to be triggered, but most of them, honestly. So let me take a drink of my tea, and then let's get to the bit you've all been waiting for. How do we not go into contraction? How do we not go into contraction? And the one I'm about to share, actually, I think will answer one of the questions I was asked by the Facebook group, which is, what is the test for? What is the test for? And that's such a human question, in that so much of the time, particularly when we're feeling challenged, if we can just understand why something's happening, it gives us such a different experience of it. And to recognize when this shows up, when we have these tests, to recognize again that it's actually something that's going on internally. It's calling you to see where that closure is, where that immaturity is. And so what's showing up, we often call it material liberation. What that material is saying to you, if you can keep choosing into this, and I'm going to talk a bit more about how we do that, this is an opportunity to expand in that place you're currently closed. So you can see the test is needed, because it's the test that allows us to see the closure. And if we're able to move through the closure, we are literally opening, we're expanding in that place. Can you see how perfect it is? It can seem though that as though the test is almost trying to stop us or hold us back. The test is how we expand. If it wasn't for the test, we wouldn't be able to expand. It's what allows us to see what's in the way and then choose to do the work to remove the closure. It doesn't sound quite right, but again, open where we're closed. So how do we do that? So firstly, again, see the meaning in it. This in itself, the reason we name challenges and tests as material of liberation, those of us in the work Awaken the Wild, is because that in itself allows us to see it has meaning. To see it as material for our liberation in itself changes it. In itself allows us to see there is deep meaning, real value in the test. So that's the first thing. Just notice that's what it is. That will change things radically on its own. It's not going to do all the work for you, but as soon as we're able to come back to that recognition of, okay, this isn't something that's happening on the outside that's a bad, wrong thing, and it shouldn't be happening. It's actually material for my liberation, showing me where the closure is in here. So that's the first thing. Recognize it has meaning. Recognize it for what it is. The next thing is choose and choose again, because we'll have the opportunity again and again to devote to that expansion. Whatever the expansion is, if you chose into it from an aligned place, if you know it was something that was aligned with your soul, with your vision, choose that. Continue to choose that. Trust that if it is aligned, it's what you're here for. You aren't here for another life. You're here for this life, in this moment that you are being called into. The next thing is, if there's pain involved in this expansion, which is typically how we're going to experience tests, I mean, the pain could come out in the form of stress, anxiety, sadness, shame, so many ways. Let's just say pain for the moment. If we're experiencing pain, That is because of an internal wound. And of course, there's going to be examples sometimes, and they're going to be probably the minority, where we're not talking like, are there real life awful things that happen, abuse, emergency situations which cause pain? Yes, that's not what I'm talking about here. And I could spend a whole ton of time caveating that. I'm going to go on the idea that if you're here listening to this show and you understand everything I've spoken before about understanding what's aligned for us, that's not what I'm talking about. If we're choosing into an expansion that's aligned for us, and we're then experiencing pain from the tests, we know is something internal that's being triggered there. So when we feel it's being triggered, that's a call for love. That is always a call for love. And this is, again, sometimes I just feel like it's so simple, really. It manifests in so many different ways, but it is all a call for love. And the more we recognize that, the more we can see all these different situations that seem complex, seem as though there must be a different answer here and a different answer here. Ultimately, it's all a call for love. So if the only thing you do is, and I'm pretty sure I said this on the last episode about the shadow pole, if the only thing you do is bring love to that place in you, that wound that you've identified is being triggered, if the only thing you do is pause and bring love there, that on its own is the most powerful thing you can do. And so very specifically, if I go back to the relationship example, if you know that sensation of the person you're in a relationship with, if you're starting to think, oh, are they pulling away? Starting to second guess, like, oh, they took longer to reply to my text. You've identified that it is that abandonment wound. Bring love to that part of you, that little boy or girl that experienced that abandonment and is now so scared they're going to experience it again. Bring love there. And this is not to be rushed. Sometimes that part on its own can take a long time. Sometimes that's what's there to do and do and do and do. And quite often, when we're back in our heart, when we're able to feel that love, there's a clear next aligned action to take. Aligned action to take in that expansion. So we'll know that once we're back in our hearts again, when we're able to feel love for that part of ourselves, that next aligned action to take will be revealed. And that can be revealed in all sorts of ways. Sometimes it might be an idea, it might be some kind of image, it could be an opportunity that you suddenly notice. It can come in all sorts of forms. But once we're back in our hearts and redevoted to that expansion, we'll know what's next to do. And the feeling is so different to that kind of jumping around, like trying to do all the things from fear or withdrawing. It's so clear when we're shown an aligned action to take, when we're back in our hearts, it's night and day different to what we would have been doing from fear. And then rinse and repeat. Every time we're triggered, come back to there. And I would have gone into this in probably more detail in previous episodes about shadow work, and I'll see what we can do to link those in the show notes as well. But in simple terms, that's what's there to do. And of course, these things are so much easier, particularly if we're in a really big expansion, if we can have support from others to do so. This is obviously what we do all the time in the work of Awaken the Wild. So whatever is the right way for you to get support, choose that. It's hard work. I mean, it's hard work anyway, but it's very hard work to do alone. So I really would encourage you, if you are in a big expansion or you're being called towards a big expansion, see what you can do to get help from people that understand how these things show up, to allow you to keep choosing in rather than going to the contraction. Because as I said, that call won't go away. Once you've stepped, this is the kind of downside in a way of setting foot on this path of soul. It doesn't let up. It doesn't let up. It won't give you a quiet life once you've chosen into it. You'll be being called back to choose into it again. And then, assuming you've done the work to alchemize that wound, opening that place, your soul's come back, you've expanded to this next level, you'll be all shiny and wonderful and powerful and enjoying life in this new expansion until that next call from soul to expand again, and then it all starts all over again. And my hope is you've heard something in what I've shared here that will support you in that. And I'd love to hear, do share in our Facebook group. And if you're listening to this and you're not already in our Facebook group, it is facebook.com/group/primal happiness. I'd love to know what showed up for you listening to this. And share, there's questions asked at the beginning. Do share what came up for you there. Share what came up as I was talking about the different ways that we can journey through this. And I would love to know what that expansion you're being called to is. What else? So if you are watching this on YouTube or on our Facebook group and you aren't already a subscriber to our podcast, you are really missing out. Go to primalhappiness.co/podcast and subscribe. If you'd like to find out how to join us in Walking the Path of Waking the Wild, we don't currently have any openings. I think next we're hoping to have a kind of more accessible opening to the Path of Waking the Wild later this year. But I know for sure that we'll be starting to open up opportunities at the beginning of next year, which will include our full roster. Actually, we're intending to open spaces on Waking the Wild Feminine, Waking the Wild Masculine, Waking the Wild Sovereign, and Waking the Wild Medicine. And you can find out about all of those at primalhappiness.co/go deeper. They always sell out. So even though that might seem quite a way away until next year, it really is worth registering your interest so that you can find out as soon as we open up spaces, and you'll be the first to know so you don't miss out if that is the expansion you're being called to. What else? Oh, if you're not already a subscriber to our Moonly newsletter, that's at primalhappiness.co/Moonly. I think that's everything. Again, I would love to know the expansion you're being called to, and I want to take a moment also to acknowledge you. It's not an easy path. It takes courage. It takes courage, and it is worth everything. So you have all my love as you are journeying on this path, as you are moving into your expansion. I celebrate you fully. I really do. Sending you all my love. Mwah. Thank you so much for joining me. Have a wonderful rest of your day.